if you've ever heard the idea that you can raise a child, do all the right things, and still end up with an adult or child that is unappreciative, unsuccessful, disrespectful, and just a disappointment. Professor Jiang outlines an argument of why that is the case, which I'm going to reiterate here and expand on. So, first, we need to define what is success. Well, within our society, there have been many studies, many experiments, many things done to figure out what makes someone successful. One thing that you may have heard of is called the marshmallow experiment. The marshmallow experiment, if you have not heard of it, I will describe. It is basically a Columbia professor took a bunch of 4 and 5-year-olds and one by one sat them in a room, started asking them some questions about their life, their family, their day, what they like, what they dislike. And so they thought that's what they were doing there. But then he stops in the middle of questioning and says, "Hey, I have to go do something and I'll be right back. While you're waiting, here's a marshmallow. You can eat that. Or if you wait till I get back and you have not eaten it, I will give you another marshmallow. So you can have 2 marshmallows if you can wait." And then what that experimenter or that interviewer would do is he would go behind a glass wall that only he could see through, but they could not see through the other side. And they would watch as that child struggled to not eat that marshmallow. And they would see what they would do. And what they noticed is the kids that were able to not eat that marshmallow, the kids that were able to delay gratification for the moment and wait for the second marshmallow, they followed those kids over decades. They followed all these kids over decades to see, okay, what's happening in their lives. The kids that were able to say no and have self-control, those kids were more likely to avoid alcohol, avoid drugs, have better relationships, have better jobs, better positions, make more money. And so they said, oh, that's interesting. Self-control or emotional regulation. Self-control or emotional regulation is the big takeaway there. There's another theory that says as you do things in life, you're going to have setbacks. You're going to fail sometimes. Well, some people, when they fail, they say, you know what? I'm just going to try again. I'm going to keep going at it. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep doing it until I figure it out because I know I can make it. That's called a growth mindset. There are other people, when they fail, they say, you know what? I'm not going to try again. I failed, which means this is not for me and I shouldn't do this. That I don't want to look like a failure. I don't want to be a failure. And so I should just stick to the things that I do well. And that's called a fixed mindset. And so successful people have a growth mindset because the big takeaway here, they are more resilient. And then there's another theory that says when you're practicing something, let's say you're practicing a sport and you're wanting to be good at this sport, there are a few approaches. One approach is you practice when the team practices and you do what everybody else is doing. The other approach says, why don't you look a little bit ahead and say, what do I want to get good at? What do I need to get good at? If I want to succeed, what do I need to strategize about? And then you come up with a game plan of, okay, I want to be better at dribbling the ball because in the game, I keep losing the ball. So I want to be better at dribbling the ball. So you practice and drill that skill and you get better and better at it. And then you see in the game, how did that play out? Did it work? Did you get the result that you were looking for? And if not, okay, then you go back and you practice a different way, but you're very deliberate. You self-assess, okay, I did this and this is the result that it gave me. It worked or it didn't work. And then if it did work, cool. Now you can move on to the next skill that you want to improve and continue doing that until you get to the goal that you're looking for. And so this idea of deliberate practice, the main takeaway from this is self-assessment or self-reflection. Okay? And then you may have heard of something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect basically just says, well, what they did, they took a bunch of students, they gave them an IQ test, and then they asked the students, how did they think they ranked amongst their peers? And what was interesting was the top 5% thought they were in the top 20%. They didn't think they were the top of the top. They thought it was pretty easy. For me, it must be pretty easy for a lot of people, but I'm probably in the top 20. And the bottom 5%, they didn't think they were in the bottom 5%. They thought they were average. And so the idea is that it's a little bit difficult to rank yourself against others. And in fact, most people throughout life have a harder time relating to people that don't think like them, that don't act like they do. So the idea is that people who are dumber don't know they're dumb. Whether that's actually true of the Dunning-Kruger effect of the dumbest people are the positions of power, that's debatable. So what they found was, hey, these things, successful people all have these things. The problem is, and you may have heard of this before, correlation does not equal causation. And so they tried to teach this to students to help them have self-control and emotional regulation, to help them be resilient, to help them to self-assess. And they could teach this to people, but that did not turn them into successful people. In fact, it's sort of like this. If you have somebody you see that successful people wake up at 4 a.m., so you decide to wake up at 4 a.m., that doesn't make you a success. The reason why these people are waking up at 4 a.m. is because they have things that they want to do. They already have a plan. They are excited about what they're about to create, right? They are already in that mood. And so just because you do these things, this is sort of on the surface, you're imitating what's on the surface, not necessarily what's happening underneath. When we expand out and we look at things on a macro level, one of the biggest factors of whether someone's going to be successful or not really comes down to whether their parents were successful or not. Really comes down to whether their parents had money or not. And so let's look at the difference in parenting, because there is a difference in parenting from those who have money and those who don't. Parents who come from like a ruling class background or money background, they have a high vocabulary. Those who don't have a low vocabulary. That means these parents are not only speaking to their kids with more words, bigger words, they're explaining things more. They're more able to describe things in differing ways. These parents over here, they only have very few ways to describe things and not very effectively. And they use very common words. These parents over here also have more stability because they have more money, they have secure income, they have more stability in their life. These parents have more volatility. And because of that, this creates more stability for the child or more volatility for the child. So this parent can say, we're going to go on a vacation in 2 weeks, and they will go on that vacation. This parent will say, we're going to go out to eat for your birthday to celebrate that you got these good grades. But then when it comes time, hey, sorry, my paycheck isn't what I thought it was going to be. Or we had an unexpected bill and I just don't have the money. So there's a lot of broken promises here. Another thing is the relationship that these parents have with their children, or when they're explaining things, teaching their child, is a more friendly relationship, more affirming relationship, where the relationship that these folks have with their child is a more commanding relationship. They're telling their child, do this, do that. They're telling their child, here's why this makes sense to do and that doesn't make sense to do. If this child touches or is about to touch a hot stove, they say, hey, let me explain something to you. That stove is really hot. And if you touch it, it can burn. And if it burns, it will hurt. And here are the consequences. You may not be able to play with your toys because you're in pain. We may have to go to the hospital. You're going to feel that pain. You're going to see it's going to take a long time to heal. And they'll explain why, because they have the time to explain, because they're not focused on trying to make more money or have to go to the job or anything like that. These folks, they're more commanding. Their vocabulary is a lot more direct in this way. Don't touch that or you're going to be in trouble. Don't touch that or you'll get a spanking. There's pain involved in their teaching. If I have to tell you that one more time, we're going to have a problem. That is a command relationship. And this leads to outcomes, that all of these things lead to outcomes for their children where they have lower self-control, lower resilience, lower ability to self-assess. Why? Because when this child wants to self-assess, they feel a lot of pain when they reflect on themselves because of missed commitments or pain behind how they were taught to do things. They don't really understand another way of thinking about things because they have a low vocabulary. They've only been exposed to very few ways of thinking of things. They have low resilience because if they continue disobeying their parents, they continue getting punished. They have lower self-control and emotional regulation because, again, broken promises. So when they're sitting there in front of the marshmallows, it's not actually about self-control or delayed gratification or that these kids are just not capable of it. They're making a value judgment based on trust. Hey, I have a marshmallow in front of me right now. The adults in my life have shown me that they're not very trustworthy. And this person is saying he's going to give me another marshmallow in some future time. Fat chance. I'm going to eat this marshmallow now. That's the way they look at it. They're looking at it. It's not about emotional regulation. It's not that these kids who were able to withstand the 5 minutes or the 10 minutes are better. It's that they learned, like these folks here, that things will be explained to them. They can trust the people around them. They can trust the future. They can trust their environment. People want to help them. People are friendly. They are on their side. They want to help them understand. And so they learn, hey, when you fail, there's somebody there, an environment there to pick them back up, explain things, and help them go forward. So they become resilient. They learn, why should I fear failure? They learn how to self-assess because somebody explains to them, here's why that didn't work. Here's what you can do instead. Here's how you can be even better. So they learn to self-assess and improve. They have a growth mindset. Yes, successful people do have better emotional regulation. They do have more resilience. They do have the ability to self-assess. They have a growth mindset. They do practice with intention. They do all these things. But they are successful, therefore they do these things. It is not because they do these things first that makes them successful. And so it's interesting because schools have tried to teach these things in the classroom with very little success. Because by the time a student gets to the class, it's too late. They've already learned this at home. The other thing is schools have tried to teach this in the school. But again, it is too late because they've already come from this at home, right? And so this is very interesting because why then can we not tell a parent, just do this and your success for your child goes up way, way up? Well, the issue is, or the challenge is, it is very difficult or challenging for many parents to change. Not saying that it's impossible, but it is very difficult. And for a very specific reason, which I'm going to show you right now. It's very difficult for parents to change because we as a society have stratified ourselves or separated ourselves into two main groups. Again, there's that ruling class, and then there's everyone else, right? What most parents are actually optimizing for, what they're unconsciously thinking, not consciously, but unconsciously, what they're optimizing for is for their children to fit in with other children and for themselves as parents to fit in with their peers. This is happening in both the top layer here and with everyone else. They are looking for, how can I ensure that my child fits in? We hear this all the time from parents. I talk to parents all the time, and I say, hey, you can make your child really, really smart. You could pull your child out of school. You could do so many different things. And a big major question that I get is, well, will my child still be able to fit in? Will they have friends, right? And it's an important question, because what most people are thinking is they're thinking of this idea of, if I don't have a tribe, right, then I could be ostracized. I could be by myself. And it is much harder to get by, much lonelier, and possibly could spell death if I don't have a community, if I don't have friends. But what these parents are doing is the reason why they have a commanding tone with their children, the reason why they have the authoritative style, the layered vocabulary, is because what they're doing is they're teaching their child, in order to get by, you need to obey commands. You're going to need to obey commands from your boss. You're going to need to obey commands from the police or from authority figures. You're not going to want to question them. You're just going to want to submit to their authority. What they're learning over here with the higher vocabulary, with the ability to explain things, is the way that they get ahead in this community is they communicate, they negotiate, they debate, they talk, and they decide who is going to be the next leader. Who's going to lead this? And let me explain why I should be the leader, right? And so they need to be able to express themselves and withstand setbacks, right? This is very effective for being a leader. This is very effective for being an employee. If you do something in this class where you're teaching your child to communicate more effectively, what happens is most of your peers in this class, they start to say, no, don't do that. You're doing things wrong. They don't look at you and say, oh, wow, you're so enlightened. You read all these parenting books. You read all these education books. You did all these. They say, no, that's wrong. That's weird. Don't do that. Don't share that. And so people end up, unfortunately, in order to keep their friends, in order to keep their social structure, in order to keep their place within society, they end up maybe changing one or two things, which is really interesting, because even right now, there are a lot of parents who are looking at technology. They're looking at AI, automation. They're looking at YouTube and TikTok, and they're saying it is very uncertain what the future looks like. I don't want my kids playing on Roblox. I don't want my kids doing these certain things that all the other kids are doing, but I do want them to fit in. And so I guess I have to acquiesce here and there in order for them to fit in. But what if I told you there's another way? Because what's interesting is, as this child goes up in vocabulary, goes up in stability, goes up in their ability to trust their environment, their ability to understand their environment, their ability to have things explained to them and comprehend those things, as they go up in those things, this is very much a layer after layer after layer after layer thing, right? And they can start to communicate with people who are in these higher layers. They can rise up the ranks. these people don't want their kids hanging out with these people here. And interestingly enough, these people also don't want their kids hanging out with these people over here. These are two different worlds, right? But as you give your child more and more of these tools, the ability to self-regulate, the ability to be resilient, the ability to self-assess, they climb up these ranks. In order to do that effectively, you're going to need to be supported by a community, because otherwise these people will continue to bring you back to the layer that you started at. That's what they'll do unconsciously, because they're thinking they're protecting you. They're keeping the social hierarchy the way that it is. The really big problem, though, is that what we're seeing now is because of social media, because of television, because of entertainment, everyone is getting a very similar messaging. And these people are also being influenced by some of these things here. So what is the more effective route? Well, it is taking your child and surrounding yourself with other people who are also optimizing for the best results or the best outcomes, or for their child. Really, the starting point is for your child to reach their full potential, right? To obtain their full potential. If you're operating within this sphere, this is why you can do everything quote unquote right by the standards of the people around you and still end up with a child who is unsuccessful. Still end up with a child who resents you. Why? Who's unappreciative. Why? Because this system does not operate in the same way that it used to. It used to be you could just keep your head down, obey authority, and get a good job that would last you decades and would provide for your family. That is no longer the case. It used to be that you could do these things and fit in with your peers and everything was all good. But now, as I said before, with changing technologies, the future is uncertain. The kids realize, wait a minute, the kids realize today while they're in school, little middle schoolers and elementary students realize, I can just use AI to do my homework. What's the point of this? They're realizing that a lot of the things that we traditionally would do no longer have the same sort of importance, and they don't see the value in it, and so they rebel. And so that's why we're seeing, hey, you can do everything right, and your child still may not like it. It still may not be effective for your child, because you're not actually doing everything that's right. You're doing everything that's right according to these standards, and these standards are no longer effective. And so the way to move out, or to give your child the best opportunity, is to surround yourself with other people who have made the decision, we're going to consider what is best for ourselves, our family, our children, those around us, our friends, and try to give our children the best opportunity to reach their full potential, and surround ourselves with other people who want to do that, who are going to support us in that, and even challenge us and challenge our children to be even more and more effective, so that they can communicate more effectively with themselves. That's that self-assessment and emotional regulation, that resilience. That's a communication within yourself. They can communicate more effectively with their peers. That's that higher vocabulary, that friendliness. You find out the world is your friend. Other people in the world can be your friend. They can have discernment because they can realize, oh, this person is not trustworthy, but this person is trustworthy. I can trust the future. I can trust that what I want, I can make happen in the future. They're surrounded by a more stable environment. And that gives them the opportunity to not just excel out of this environment, but also it gives them the opportunity to change this whole social hierarchy, because this is beginning to collapse. Even for those at the top of this social hierarchy, it is beginning to collapse. And if a child is not prepared for something different, then what they're going to experience is also, well, it's going to be really bad for those here who have not moved out. It's going to be bad for those here because they're going to slide down, but it's going to be really bad for those here who have not learned anything else. Because even then, even with this collapse, they're not in any better position. They don't have the ability to withstand hardship. And so we want to give our children that ability. If you've realized that following the crowd, even good people, often leads to average outcomes, and you're looking for more than that, there's a private group of parents who are willing to step outside of that. You can find the link in the description. It requires change. It requires honesty. It requires effort. But if you're watching this, you might be a good fit. It's not for everyone, but if you watch this far, it might be for you.